ceremonial purposes, we are reconvening a new committee, but in essence, this work would have started in the last, towards the end of the last political administration, when the bill was originally tabled, and we had a first committee meeting, and advertisements were placed in the newspapers inviting individuals and interested parties to make comments. And in fact, the clerk to the committee wrote to specific stakeholder groups requesting comments on the bill, and a deadline of January 31st, 2020 was given. 14 submissions were received during that time. And of course, the committee took a break because of the budget, and then the pandemic came and it did not resume. During the procedural segment of today's proceedings, I'm going to just ask for the consent of committee members that those 14 submissions, which came from stakeholder groups, though they technically came in the previous formation of the committee, that we consider it for these purposes one and the same, and we can accept these submissions and move forward. But before moving to the procedural matters, Madam Clerk, any apologies for absence?
Minister Williams.
We have an apology from Minister Favour Williams. Okay, just moving into new business and procedural matters. Just the consent. So just want to put to the committee that we, in the previous incarnation of this committee, we went through and wrote to stakeholder groups, the stakeholder groups that the committee would have asked be written to, and ads were placed in the newspaper asking for feedback and commentary, and we received 14, in some cases quite substantial pieces of feedback from stakeholder groups, from Jamaica Lands, from the Airport Authority of Jamaica, Airport Authority of Jamaica Limited, from the Shipping Association of Jamaica, the Chancellor Hall Committee, the Montego Bay Jamaica Airports Authority Limited, PAC Kingston Airports Limited, the Customs Broker and Freight Forwarders Association, the Revenue Appeals Division at the Ministry of Finance, as well as Tonylicious Fashions, Miss Katie Ann Mundell, Mr. Cy Moore, Miss Keisha Barwise, Miss Denise Clark, and Mr. Mike Jamie. I'd like the consent of the committee for those to be accepted by this committee and for them to be distributed to committee members. Can we get all in favor? Yes. Thank you. What we'd propose to do at the next meeting of the committee would be to produce, for the Jamaica Customs Agency to produce the matrix that has all the comments that have been received, along with the Customs Agency's response, and have that matrix circulated for everybody's views. I don't know if we might also think it might also to invite one or two or three of those entities who submitted comments to appear here and to present the comments that they made. And I would, just based on the substance of the comment, meaning the length, those with longer comments, we could probably benefit from having them here, so we could hear their contributions. And if the committee is agreeable, I would perhaps ask the Shipping Association of Jamaica, the Custom Brokers Association, the Airport Authority, as well as the two airports.
Chairman, I think those who have bothered to make substantive comments, and not all of them are of the same weight, I propose. But I would like to suggest that those who have bothered to make comments that are substantive and raising, again, substantive issues. I think you've identified most of those. What I haven't seen, and I wanted to ask a question on, is whether we have reached out to, in any way, some of the foreign carriers, like DHL and others who operate in our space, because there could be, I know a general notice was put out, but there's an attitude or the feeling sometimes that really applies to Jamaican entities and not people who operate in the space. I think that, from my understanding, that this would, the act would impact their operations as well. And so I would suggest that we have some indication to them through the AmCham or somebody, or to perhaps through AmCham, if those who operate in the space want to make their comments, because this would be an opportunity for them and it could make a difference.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just to follow on the point made by our colleague, Mr. Hilton, I agree that it's important to ensure that voices are heard, and recognizing, notwithstanding, that some would have varying weight, which of course is the role of the committee to consider the different proposals which are made. I'm noting that the individuals generally have not so much focused on the bill as the intent that customs fees essentially be adjusted, that the $50 be increased, which is probably something which resounds with all of us in the committee on both sides of the aisle as it stands. And it's not necessarily an issue here, but I think that for the true transparency and openness of the process, it might be good if the Secretariat were to write to the individuals to ask if there's any point which they wish to amplify. They may not, but if an opportunity were given. I also, regarding the proposal that we now seek further submissions from entities who I would think we would recognize as fairly sophisticated entities, who would have employees who would take notice of the advertisement, the public notice made for submissions to be made. I think that where companies have not necessarily sought to take advantage, that for the committee to go further, to now reach out for them to again extend, I'm not so sure that that is a process that would add the value that we would want. I think that companies that are interested have submitted, and in fact individuals who feel passionate about the issues have actually taken the time and energy to send their submission in, and that should be given some weight, and the process should be given some respect. So I'm not so sure I support the aspect of the proposal that would have us now reaching out to entities to ask them to ask member organizations to submit, because indeed companies operating in this space would be aware that the customs bill is being reviewed, should be aware. These are companies that have attorneys and regulatory departments. So those I don't, given the time that has already been taken, I would suggest that the committee busy itself with the matters that are before us, and that we invite the persons here who have submitted to amplify any points which they wish, or if they only wish the committee to consider their written submissions, then they simply so indicate, and we proceed so to do and discuss it as a body. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, I want to make a special appeal. Again, the point of making the point of departure there is in respecting the procedure that has been employed. My experience has been that foreign entities generally, especially investors, are of the view sometimes that these processes are for domestic companies. And I know that firsthand from experience that there's that view. I simply am saying that because this particular bill will impact the operation and investments generally, that it behooves us to make that outreach. It doesn't stop the work from proceeding, but that we make that outreach because there are significant investment now, but more importantly, significant investment possible going forward. That's my suggestion.
Chairman, if it's any consolation to Member Hilton, perhaps the record could indicate that the bill has gone through an extensive consultative process, as you are aware, and customs, and it really has gestated for quite a long time. A lot of submissions and perspectives were received. I think at this stage, what will be critical is to ensure that the perspectives that have been accepted are adequately reflected in what is drafted. I don't know if Member Hilton has had any time yet to peruse the bill. It had come before to see that the attempt is to literally revolutionize the operations of customs and making it quite a rules-based system. So while I appreciate what you're seeking to achieve, it is my hope that this process is not going to be as drawn out as the one before, but that we just ensure that what is drafted is actually capturing what we're seeking to do. And this is not about excluding any perspective, because there was a really thorough consultation that was done with the Ministry Tax Policy and Jamaica Customs Agency and the stakeholders. Yes.
Chairman, I just want to keep the focus. What will be interesting is if I can be assured that throughout this long and involved process, that there have in fact been comments from that group of entities. If I am assured that they have engaged the process, but my point is that my experience tells me that in many instances, these foreign entities believe that this process in our parliament is for a domestic organization. So if in fact they have participated, I don't have an issue, but I believe that if we were to check back on the records and ensure, maybe someone from Customs can tell us what sort of consultation have they had with the carriers, the DHL, the UPS, and whatever. That would be helpful.
Chairman.
Commissioner, can you? Oh.
Yeah, Chairman, if I may, because I've been listening to the discussion and I will be guided in terms of whether or not this is the first Joint Select Committee in the last 2 years that have been looking at the Custom Act. That's the first thing. And if it is, then I believe that notwithstanding the submissions that have been made and are before us today, that there is no harm in extending an invitation to persons, interested parties, to make a submission. I understand the importance of doing things with alacrity, but if we think about even the parliamentary timetable, the truth is that we go into our budget next week. we know the constraint in terms of meetings. And though there may be an argument that the meetings can be held at another venue, I believe that we can certainly extend the invitation with a specific timeline for submission while commencing the process with the submissions that we have already received. And at the end of the day, what it does is it allows not just the persons who have had, maybe because of where they sit or the role that they play, they would have had knowledge of the discussions that would have taken place. But for those of us who are a part of the committee for the first time, it also allows us to hear from the interested parties and the concerns that they have. And I believe that there is no harm or further delay to the process if we extend the invitation. It can be done two ways. We can either do another advertisement in the newspaper of choice, and or we can write to specific entities if they were not before written to, asking for them to make submissions within a particular timeline. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of the Joint Select Committee is to get the widest views possible. And if it is that we are going to be limiting ourselves with just these that have been presented, then the point that Member Hilton raised, whether other entities have had an opportunity to present and for their views to be heard, comes into question. And so I don't believe there's any harm, Chairman, if we can do that, because we can, as Jamaicans say, ride and whistle. We can start the discussion with what we have and still extend an invitation to the other interested parties within a timeline to make their submissions. Parties could be anybody. It doesn't have to be DHL or FedEx. It could be, the man on the JUTC bus.
Yeah. Commissioner, you want to comment on the consultation process even before we got to this stage?
Okay, thank you, Minister. So, just to give some assurance that the Jamaica Customs Agency, with the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, would have had extensive consultations with various stakeholders. Now, particularly for this sector, we would have done targeted consultation and engagement where we would have written to the different sector, i.e. the e-commerce and the fast and express courier services, and engage them in areas that we believe would have been critical as it relates to this new bill and how it would impact them. So we would have had ongoing extensive engagement with these sectors and asked for their express comments in these matters. So just to ensure and just to indicate that the consultations were done.
Okay, thanks everybody for expressing their views. Opportunity is not what will be sacrificed, because everyone has had an opportunity to comment, and indeed the stakeholders who were written to were broad and varied, and we're not going to achieve a broader group of stakeholders that we wrote to the first time that we'd suddenly achieve now. In fact, the clerk just reminded me that DHL, the ones that you mentioned as a way of example, were written to at this stage of the bill and chose not to respond. We have a duty, and we have to balance interests between the thousands of Jamaicans who want this act to be passed and are very impatient about it and have made their voices heard on social media, signing petitions and so forth. We have to balance that interest. As I say, we would not be excluding opportunity, because opportunity has been given, and specifically to the international companies that you mentioned, both in the extensive consultations. We had 2 different sessions of week-long consultations, and also at the stage of the Joint Select Committee when they were written to and asked. So what we have here are comments from a number of umbrella groups, and what tends to happen is that entities don't submit on their own. They go through their umbrella organizations. And I think when we have the opportunity to invite some of them here, we will have the benefit of their experience and feedback. So I'm hoping with the provision of that additional information that the member Hilton, that the specific entities that you spoke to were written to, and the letter is right here, that you wouldn't ask us to write to them again. Okay. And Member Fraser-Binns, again, just because we have the universe of persons we wrote to is not one that is going to expand. It's the same set of stakeholders, and they chose not to. They had ample time. They chose not to apply. We have the interest of the need for the economy to be rebooted. This sector, or we're an economy that's very exposed to trade. It represents 70% of our GDP, visible and invisible trade, and we need to get on with the business of reforming and repealing, and we wouldn't have denied anybody an opportunity.
Minister, and it is not for me to question that which has been said, and I accept. I wondered whether you could provide us with the list of the entities that were written to, and secondly, whether you could help us out by perhaps sharing whatever comments they have, whether those comments have been incorporated or not. Because that will be useful for our discussion on this side when we get to that stage where we start discussing the issues. It will be useful as well. So if that could be provided, that would be useful. Thank you.
Sure, we could let you know the consultations and the entities that were involved in the consultation process. Okay, so if we can just get the committee's agreement for the entities mentioned earlier, I think Member Johnson-Smith had suggested that we extend it to the individuals as well.
The suggestion is just that they be asked if there's any point which they wish to amplify to the committee. They are clear, exactly. So, but I think because, especially on matters like this, like customs, you tend to get a feel that a little man, big man, and so we're having the umbrella organizations come in. I would say let's just give the opportunity. As I pointed out, they may say no, but I suspect that even if they do say yes, then there's probably not much further that they would go, as the matter is in relation to the Act.
Okay, as long as we are in compliance with the DRMA, there's that as well. We can take that suggestion on board and offer the invitation. It's only 15. We could ask all 15, as long as we are going to be expeditious with the time. And we get the point, we move on. The consideration of the point will happen during the deliberations of the Joint Select Committee, but we don't have to kind of belabor. Okay. So,
if someone just heard about this and wanted to make a submission, it is not being allowed. That's what we're saying.
May I provide a little guidance? So since we're using this first meeting to deliberate on procedural matter, quorum, perhaps a schedule, wondering whether the presentation of the budget will anyway disrupt the continuation of the committee immediately. And also to bear in mind that we have a number of other Joint Select Committees that are about wrapping up. So if we were able to settle the procedural matters and schedule the next set of meetings after the budget is passed, then in that time frame, a usual notice could go out. If submissions come in, then we can consider them and that time be used. And I think that perhaps would keep it in accordance with the tradition of Joint Select Committee and take care of any concern. Because I do believe that there will be some constraints, certainly on your part as chairman, given what will happen next week and how the Parliament's time will be occupied.
That's a reasonable suggestion.
Support the idea.
That's a reasonable suggestion. What AG is saying is that there'll be a natural gap anyway between now and when we meet again, and we could use that gap by just placing another public notice in, and we see what comes in from that. I'm happy to go along with that suggestion. And I think that resolves the question that was being asked. So it's left to us now to decide the date of the along, within
Keep the
procedural
quorum at
matters.
three?
The quorum, yes.
Shall we
Was-
keep it at 3? It's usually 3. We can decide otherwise, or we can keep it
Can
at
we
3 to
agree?
include the chairman. Including the chairman. It says, the standing order says the chairman shall not be excluded. No, yes, it is actually provided. But given the numbers, we could decide 3 plus the chairman to make it 4. It is up to the committee to so decide.
3 plus the chairman,
So it would
fine.
be 4 inclusive of the chairman. So that's
All in favor?
procedural matter number 1.
Okay, next procedural matter would be
Schedule of hearing, schedule of
schedule of
meetings, or,
meetings.
if possible, if we can determine at this stage, or certainly the next one.
Well, we have to, I think we have
Yes.
to, the next one and maybe one after that. It's mostly
Chairman,
scheduled.
it's only 138 pages up to the substantive act and then the schedule. But
It's 180.
please
180.
note that for the first time in the history of Jamaica, all of the provisions will be in one document, and that is a celebration.
Yes, for sure.
So it may look like a lot, but it's all the other details that everyone would ask about that we now have in one place.
Right. So the proposed timing of the next meeting is going to be in April. Do you have any the dates available? No. We can choose. Oh, wonderful. What is today? A Thursday? So yeah, that's a privilege. Let's go for 2 dates in April then.
The chairman, before
At
you,
least.
while you're considering that,
Yeah.
I heard the murmurings of our Senate colleagues who were saying that they weren't privy to or graced with a copy of this very voluminous document. But I agree with the Solicitor General.
Copies are on the way.
Yeah. Okay. Now, that notwithstanding the size, that really it's about 100 and something pages that will form the bulk of the discussions. But for consideration, it is good. It is good to see the schedules and the different. So this is a complete. This is what you use now, the customs department. Well, the schedules. Okay. All right.
Members, I've been asked to remind everyone that the copies of these are extremely limited because of the size. So we ask you to hold on to yours carefully and to bring them with you. It's not like other bills. You can come to Parliament having left them on your kitchen table and ask for a replacement. It's not going to happen with respect to this bill.
What you were going to say, Chairman, is that the revenue will not allow you to authorize further printing.
In more diplomatic language, AG.
In the challenging times, yes, I agree.
Isn't that a cost?
No, this is the one copy you have for the entire committee. All right, so April is open. I'd like to see if we could start and put some runs on the board. So I'm wondering if we could accommodate 3 meetings in April. The 8th, the 8th, the 15th. Oh, wait, yeah, when is Easter again? Oh, you're right. Easter Monday is the 5th. No, so we won't be, Easter Friday is the 2nd, so we're skipping that. Easter Thursday is the 1st, we're skipping that. So it will be the 8th, say the 15th, and then the 29th. How is that? At the same time, at 1 o'clock? Let's go for 2 o'clock then on the 8th.
Chairman, may I suggest that once we identify potential date, we can ask the committee clerk to just liaise with the other committee chairs, and we can determine a time frame and then notify.
Madam AG, there are vacancies. We try to take the vacancies. If you do that,
No, we take the days, Chairman.
Huh?
I'm saying yes, we take the days.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm compromising on. It's
Right.
just the time, just to see whether it's a 1 or a 2:30, depending on, or even a 10, or even a 10.
or better.
Yes.
Okay, I mean the spirit I accept, but implementing the spirit, what I would say is that we book it, and if we need to change the time to accommodate, then we can have a conversation and then circulate it. Right? So I would say, let's book. It's open, so let's book it, 8th, 15th, and 29th. And we're going to stick to those days. The compromise won't be to change the day. The compromise might be, all right, let's change the time if needs has some momentum and there's need another day or something like that. All right?
What time are you expecting to set this, Chairman? What time are you looking at the 2 o'clock hour? For
Yes, that's what we're looking at, yes,
Yeah, okay.
yes. And hopefully that, we will need a full session to hear the comments, and if we're inviting everybody, maybe it might be even more than one session to hear the comments. So I think that's why I wouldn't,
Do you propose to perhaps do a review of the submissions that have been received on the next meeting before we go into the clause-by-clause consideration? I would...
Well, by the next meeting, we would have any new submissions as well.
Right.
The matrix for the existing submissions would be available by the next meeting.
Oh, right.
What were you saying, to go through that matrix?
No, just to determine what it is that we would do and when we would go through the submissions. It may make sense to do them ahead of going into the clause-by-clause review.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Ahead of the clause by clause. It'll be a little more challenging with a bill of this size because it's going to require familiarity with the big kind of picture to have that discussion. But what I would hope, though, is that we probably save the meat of the discussion to the clauses, right? We ventilate it as much as possible, but we be efficient with that ventilation, recognizing that it's going to be when we get to the clauses that we're going to want to make the changes. Yes, Senator.
I wondered whether it would be useful for members of the for the TAJ to give us perhaps a summary of the critical areas, and that they don't have to do a presentation on the 8th, but we'll have some time that we could read it and advise ourselves in preparation for the discussions that will start on the 8th. The TAJ, yeah, the principal changes.
We could provide the background and philosophy.
Right.
I think.
A summary, yes.
Yeah, something like that. Yes, I think we could do that. So, Commissioner.
Chairman, perhaps an overview of the model of the bill.
Correct.
probably
I'm sure
more
that
helpful.
exists already.
Yes.
So we could just circulate it.
Certainly, Minister. We have done it in the past. Okay. Yeah. And just to correct Jamaica Customs, JCA. As it relates,
Executive agency.
No, I heard a mention of TAJ.
I know.
Our sister agency.
They both collect money, but don't confuse them. Yes. Okay, any other business? Well, it remains for me to thank you for your participation in this committee. And I think you might want to get started on the document and to familiarize yourself with it so that when the comments are made, we can have a substantive discussion that's informed by what the bill has to say. If, given that we've already set the date for the next meeting, I move for the committee to be adjourned. All in favor? Thank you very much.
Reggae Month is February.